Hello and welcome to this India Today special. COVID 2.0 has put the spotlight squarely on the B16172 variant of the virus that is spreading across India and has been detected in as many as 44 countries across the world. To demystify the many concerns surrounding the B16172 virus, I'm joined by the country's leading virologist, Dr. Gagandeep Kang. Appreciate your joining us here, ma'am. I want to ask you at the very outset, the big concern that many people have, which is that even after getting single or double dose vaccinations, there are people who are getting COVID infected. Does that suggest at some level that the B16172 variant, which is prevalent across India at the moment, is resistant to vaccines like Covishield and Covaxin?
At the moment, we have no evidence to show us that the variant that we are seeing, B16172, is resistant to vaccines. We have some data that has come from laboratory studies that says that you might need to have a little more antibody in order to be able to neutralize this variant. But usually people who are given the vaccines make much more antibody than they need. So there should be enough of a cushion for people to be protected from these variants as well. But this is laboratory data, and we need real life data to tell us whether vaccines are working or
not. The real life data, at least in a few instances, ma'am, is suggesting that there are people who are getting infected by COVID even after taking the double dose. So what's the explanation for that? What's the scientific explanation? Does that suggest at some level at least that B16172 might be escaping immune response systems?
So when we look at how vaccines work, we need to understand that vaccines are intended to prevent severe disease and prevent deaths. They are not actually intended to prevent infections from taking place. If that happens, that's a bonus. That's very important for public health. But that is not the key goal for when vaccines are made for a disease that is as severe as SARS-CoV-2. We do have some data from other parts of the world to show that many of the vaccines that have been evaluated in other places with other variants, the vaccines are preventing not just severe disease, mortality, they are also preventing to some extent infections. Now, these are early data. We don't have those data with vaccines in India. But in general, for the limited amount of data we have from Mumbai, there is work that shows that where Covishield, which is 90% of the vaccine that has been used in India so far, was given to a large proportion of the population, the over 60s in Mumbai, there does seem to be a reduction in severe disease and mortality in that group. So early evidence in India that vaccines are working. We need more evidence like this, but you should not be expecting that vaccines will wipe out infections, that vaccines will wipe out mild disease. Vaccines will convert what might have been very severe disease to a milder form or to infection.
So can we say with some confidence that at least those who've taken the 2 doses of the vaccine, be it Covishield or Covaxin, are almost unlikely to get hospitalized with severe SARS-CoV-2 illness? Can we say that therefore with some confidence, or is the jury still out even on that?
I think we can say with confidence that the vaccines have a very high chance of preventing severe disease and mortality in people who have taken 2 doses of Covaxin. And for Covishield, even with 1 dose, the data from the UK shows us that there is very good protection, over 70% protection against severe disease, against mortality, including in the elderly, for at least 3 months with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So we should expect very good protection with 1 dose and possibly even better protection with 2 doses. We still don't have 2 dose
Interesting.
efficacy data.
In Interesting, you said the second dose after 3 months. Effectively, are we therefore looking at the second dose even now as a potential booster after 3 months? There's been a lot of debate over the time gap between the first and the second dose when it comes to the AstraZeneca Covishield vaccine. Are we suggesting that the second dose is potentially after 3 months almost a booster dose? And do you agree, therefore, with the government of India, which now says that the gap should be 12 to 16 weeks between the 2 doses?
Well, the data that we have for the performance of the vaccines in the real world comes from mostly the UK, and we have some data from the clinical trials. From the real world data, for 1 dose, the efficacy looks like it may be above 70%. And with 2 doses, you begin to see an efficacy of above 80%. So, the value for the second dose in some senses is less than the value for the first dose. So if you're thinking in public health terms, would I want double the number of people to have 75% protection as compared to 85% protection in a fully vaccinated, but half the number? Then I would argue for giving more first doses and getting at least that 75% protection. Now, coming to the dosing interval,
So what?
that's been
Please go ahead.
That's been decided based on the data, both from the clinical trial as well as the evidence that has emerged from the UK, showing that the decision to place their gap of both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine at 12 weeks was the right decision to make. These data became available in February of this year, but have now been bolstered by further data that came out in the last few weeks that indicate that use of these vaccines with a 12-week dosing interval actually results not only in a reduction of severe disease and mortality, it also results in a reduction in transmission, even in high transmission settings like households.
So what I'm trying to understand, ma'am, is that there were doctors and medical workers, in particular in India, who got their 2 doses within a gap of 4 to 6 weeks, because that was the recommended interval in the months of February and March. Then that changed to 8 weeks. Now it's changed to 12 to 16 weeks. How do you explain such a wide variation in such a short period of time? Are those who took the vaccine in February, March just as protected as those who will now take it with a 12-week gap?
So this is an area where the data are still emerging, but to people who took the vaccine at the 4 to 6 week interval, we have to remember that the US trial that involved 30,000 people, half of whom were given the vaccine, had a 4-week gap between the 2 doses. And that was a vaccine that had above 75% efficacy. So the data are strong for whichever gap has been recommended so far. The question really is, in all of these trials and in the data that we are gathering now with 1 dose, with 2 doses, this is all early protection, because we give the vaccine and immediately we are starting to measure protection for the period that we can measure. Now, the thinking really is, do you need the second dose at all? And if you need the second dose, what do you expect it to do? And what is the best way for that second dose of an adenovirus vectored vaccine? Some people make the argument that this is a vaccine that might be better for long-term protection, in which case the gap should be possibly even wider. It's been proposed we might want to think about a 4 to 6 month gap as compared to the 12 to 16 weeks that has been proposed for India right now. It's very important to remember that these vaccines are new. We are finding the best ways to use them. So far, every wave that we have tried has benefit. In the future, we'll find out what is optimal for both short and long-term protection.
So net, what you are saying, Dr. Kang, to me is that the longer the gap, as of now, the better it is in terms of your immunoefficiency, hopefully in building up antibodies. So 12 to 16 weeks as of now is ideal, but even one dose could be sufficient, and possibly the second is a booster.
Yes, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is also an adenovirus vectored vaccine, is being used as a single dose vaccine. And when the AstraZeneca vaccine was being designed, it was originally designed as a single dose vaccine. They tried a second dose, found that the immune response was better, and therefore decided to go with a 2-dose schedule, because it was a time when you were trying to make something for a pandemic and you had no idea how well or badly it would work. Immunogenicity does not necessarily translate to efficacy. So the second dose was insurance. Now, how much we need that insurance, how long the insurance will last, what it means to delay doses, we will find out only by studying the people who have been given the vaccine at varying intervals and following them up for a long time, trying to see, does this protect you for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months? We haven't had the time to measure long-term protection with varying schedules. What we do know is that with all the schedules that we've tried so far, there is very good short-term protection with one dose of vaccine, and possibly that will extend beyond the period that we have measured so far. Unfortunately, because it's a 2-dose schedule, we may not have the opportunity to measure the efficacy of a single dose in the long term.
But clearly what you are suggesting, Dr. Kang, is one of the gaps in the system is that we need a more rigorous study of these vaccines and their impact on those who are receiving them in the country. We still don't have that kind of robust data in India at the moment, and therefore the jury to some extent is still out. Am I correct that we need much more data and possibly a nationwide study?
I hope everyone's listening to you, Rajdeep, because essentially that's what Israel did. Israel got access to the Pfizer vaccines by paying a high price, but they got it early and they got it in the volumes that they wanted because they were willing to convert themselves into a laboratory for Pfizer and share data with them. And much of this reassuring data that we have for Pfizer started to come out within 8 weeks of Israel starting its vaccination program. We know that the Pfizer vaccine protects against death, severe disease, hospitalizations, infections, only because the Israelis were willing to give the vaccine quickly and then share the data very, very quickly. This is what we should be doing for every vaccine that we are using.
Is it therefore, could I say therefore with some confidence that the Pfizer mRNA vaccine is superior to Covishield Covaxin, or you're saying that because we don't have enough data when it comes to Covishield and Covaxin as compared to Pfizer, we can't make those comparisons so easily? And the problem is that we haven't spent enough or invested enough in getting that data in the Indian context.
So right now, we have no head-to-head comparisons of Covishield and Covaxin, or Covishield and anything else, and Covaxin and anything else. However, if you look at data that's come out from the UK, which compares the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccines, those two vaccines are comparable. So the fact that Pfizer showed up a 95% efficacy in the clinical trial and AstraZeneca had a 75% or lower efficacy in the clinical trial may depend actually on the design of the clinical trial. And what we need is real world evidence, which much of the rest of the world is gathering. And we should be too, given that we have given out over 180 million doses of vaccine over a period of 3 months. We should have that data on how well these vaccines are working by now. And
Absolutely.
when we think
now,
about
public
variants,
health experts, Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. So just to add to that, when we think
Please
about variants, we are in an unusual situation where we have a variant that started out here and has spread to other parts of the world. So just like we learned so much about the B117 variant from studies that were done in the UK, maybe India has a responsibility to be doing the studies on B1617 to ensure that the rest of the world knows what it has to prepare for. But that can only be done when you have both clinical and laboratory scientists working very closely with each other and producing data in real time.
Because that is precisely the concern, that B1617, many now believe, is possibly more contagious and transmissible than the original UK variant. Would I be right in saying that? That it is possibly more contagious and more transmissible, accounting for most of the infections in India and increasingly in other parts of the world also?
Absolutely. So data from INSACOG in India and data that has emerged from the UK is showing that B1617 is outcompeting B117. Now, B117 was 50% more infectious, more transmissible than the previous strain, which was D614G. And if this strain, B16172, is 50% more infectious than or more transmissible than B117, then you're in a situation where you may be able to see cases going up in places that had reasonable control before. And in the UK, this is certainly something that they are very worried about, given that they are planning to reopen. So the level of preparedness, the level of interventions depends on how transmissible the variant that you're dealing with really is. And you'll have to step up those measures if you have a more transmissible variant.
Right.
And that's what B16172 is.
Does that also partly explain why this particular variant is spreading so rapidly in rural India? In the first phase of COVID 1.0, if I may call it that, we saw the countryside in India relatively insulated. This time it is spreading right across the country to districts that were relatively protected in the first wave. Does that suggest to you, as you're suggesting, that this particular variant is far more contagious and transmissible?
This variant does appear to be far more contagious and transmissible. One of the things that we think about when we look at infections is what is the infectious dose of an agent. Now, it has not been established for SARS-CoV-2, but it's possible that it is in the hundreds rather than in the thousands. So a 50% more transmissible strain might require fewer viral particles to infect individuals, which just means that you will have that many more people easily infected. So your immune system might have been able to handle 1,000 viruses of an older variant, but it can't handle 1,000 viruses of B1617.
You know, Dr. Kang, according to ICMR, the post-vaccination breakthrough infection rate in India for COVID-19 is just a small number, between 0.02 to 0.04%. Do you agree with this data? And for our viewers, breakthrough infections are those in which SARS-CoV-2 RNA is detected from a person who has received 2 doses of a vaccine 14 days after the second dose. Is it as small as that, 0.02 to 0.04%? Dr. Kang, or is the jury again out on that? Are there concerns it could be much greater?
So I think we have to define what we mean by breakthrough infections a little more clearly. Is this infection, which means somebody tested positive by RT-PCR or a rapid antigen test and had symptoms or did not have symptoms? Now, if it's the did not have symptoms, then it was a random event for them to get tested, right? So those kinds of infections are ones that would ordinarily be discounted, because what we are worried about is infections after vaccination that result in symptoms and particularly result in severe disease. So if that number that ICMR is citing is one that relates only to severe disease, then it is feasible, but still seems a little bit low to me, because these vaccines we know are not perfect vaccines.
2 final concerns. 1, children. There's a lot of debate already brewing whether this particular variant affects children. Many pediatricians say very, very mild cases, we are being unduly alarmist. Do you believe that this variant affects children, or are we being alarmist?
All variants affect children. Does this one unusually affect children? I don't think so. I think the fact that we are seeing more children come to hospital is because there are more cases and more infections out there. Among children, the risk of severe disease continues to be very, very low. And when we see cases in hospital, that just tells us that there is a lot of infection and disease in children out there. So I don't think that there is any particular extra concern that we need to have in public health terms that is special for children. This is a virus that is everywhere. It affects everybody, including children.
The final concern is that this particular COVID surge, is it finally plateauing in India? Do you believe that the worst is over, or do you see this virus mutating further, and therefore we could be in for several more months where infections will continue to multiply, and dare I say, so will the death rate?
One thing that it's very important for everyone to remember is that every time viruses replicate, they multiply, they infect new people and continue to spread. Essentially, what they are creating is opportunities for new variants to arise. So when you have widespread replication in millions of people, thousands of times, your chances of getting new variants is very high. If you can suppress this replication by limiting the number of cases, then the chances of new variants arising also go down. Essentially, we have to suppress the virus. And in order to do that, the only ways to do it is to stop the spread of disease, all the non-pharmaceutical interventions that all of us know so well, and make sure that people are protected by vaccination. Both of these are essential. While we may be in a situation where cases have been declining for a week now, what we are seeing is that it's different in different parts of the country. There are parts of the country where cases are still increasing, including in rural areas in the east and the south. So the fact that the overall numbers are coming down is a relief, but it's also not time to let down our guard. There is still a lot that we have to do. And if we are to see a better year next year, that really depends on what we are doing today.
Dr. Kang, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and clearing so many doubts and concerns over B16172.